a break. But I'm very happy to welcome all of you to this session devoted to algorithms, program codes, and these are all products of digital development. These are concepts that have formed the foundation of our computer industry, one of the most rapidly developing industry in Russia. And a lot of new IP objects appear on a daily basis. And of course, software programs are intellectual property objects. And when the first software appeared, when the first program code was invented, there was nothing left in terms of intellectual property rights than equal software products to pieces of music. But even the Vienna Convention, or pieces of music or pieces of literature, and even the Vienna Convention treats software programs in a similar way. And this is our reality, the reality of today. So should we focus more on the content or the form? But we are very well aware of the fact that, of course, software programs are IP objects, and inside any software program, there are lots of algorithms, which are tools or means of processing information, and algorithms have to be protected as any information, as any intellectual property project. So software programs have to be protected. But there's another story pertaining to it. In the world of today, in the world of phones, in the world of visualization interface, and the layout of information, sounds, music, visual image, media images, these are all intellectual property objects. They are fruits of somebody's creativity, because before we actually start designing an algorithm, we visualize it. But unfortunately, there's no culture of protecting this kind of intellectual property object in Russia. And very often software programs are qualified as industrial and protected as industrial inventions. And what can be done to protect algorithms, to protect computer codes and software programs? What can be done to protect the rights, intellectual property rights of designers, those who are responsible for designing layout, presenting information? So the computer industry, while being the most flexible and the most rapidly developing industry, still lacks the necessary legislation protecting intellectual property rights. And the major topic of today is what can be done. So we have to find ways and means of finding a solution to the problem. So my hypothesis is the following one. So in software design, computer designers, these are people who are not skillful in applying for a patent. They don't know how to do it, and they cannot interpret the existing legislation. They don't know how to protect their own rights. On the other hand, they are fully aware that they can protect their own inventions using cloud technologies and some other means. And some computer designers think that, well, if we renew our software on a regular basis, it will protect our intellectual property rights, which is, of course, not the case. And today we have a very impressive list of speakers to discuss this topic from every angle. I would like to appeal to the speakers today not to exceed 5 to 6 minutes. Please be brief, because I would want us all to exchange our opinions at the end of today's session. So I was just planning how to give the floor. So shall we start with industries, or then I changed my mind and decided to start with lawmakers. Now you know that now the state is implementing the program of digital economy, and there is a good opportunity to send amendments and comments to the existing legislation that will help us to simplify the life of our computer industry and make mechanisms of legal IP protections more efficient. I know that there was even there is even a problem of the name of the computer, EVM in Russian. So we still use the old term EVM in Russian, even though it's not applicable to smartphones and new computers. And Yachim Yuri, our first speaker, representing Pepelayev Group, head of the Intellectual Practice Group, Pepelayev Group. I would like to address this question to him. What is being done in lawmaking?
So we had some problems with clicker in our morning session. So probably it will work better now. Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues. Before I get down to my presentation, I would like to say that Sergei has mentioned some very important issues, like the forms of protection, not legal protection. Yesterday, I talked to my colleague from a company which deals with the development with the legal development here in Kaliningrad, and I asked whether they had any disputes or any issues on that, and he said, no, we don't have any issues, and we don't have any disputes. We just don't work with the companies with whom we do not find any understanding. So there are some some matters which go beyond the legal ones. But then he said that if I need to, if I need to, just work it out, to work out some software while I start working with it, when the program goes to the general access, then, I will have more problems than profit. And then I don't work with such program or such software anymore. So we also say that we have got some soft or just some weak measures of protection of intellectual property in our civil code. And sometimes it is really a challenge to protect the intellectual property within the Russian legislation. But I would like to speak about how we develop the legislation within the framework, within the program Digital Economy. And we have already saw 4 laws, 4 bills that dealt with 3D models or 3D images of the objects and how to register them in Ross patent. That's just that concerns some library issues when they think about using the copyright and the shares in the intellectual property. And the 4th bill that we have been discussing is about the software and databases. And we try to rename them. Can I have my presentation, please? I don't have very much time, so I get down to our research. We have conducted comparative research about the jurisdiction on software and databases. And you can see that we have done a lot of work. And it resulted in the fact that the coded legislation cannot be found anywhere. And depending on the legislation, depending on the level of the legislation, our Russian legislation can be evaluated as quite progressive, and it has some really well-developed issues. And if we think about the technological development, legislation always lags behind. But in general, we were quite surprised to see that the situation in Russia is much better than in any other countries, even developed countries. Some concrete results of the research showed that software uses some kind of unified general common terminology. Yeah, so we don't use the term electronic calculating machines, but we use the term software for computers. And it's just quite well accepted. And when Sergei started talking about this, just the things, he named them software, and that's, a kind of accepted term. The second common point, or point shared by many legislations, is the unanimity of the, of the programs,
являются международные соглашения.
the unanimity of some derived programs and some doctrines, some kind of agreements and doctrines on what is seen as the software and what is the turnover of the ownership rights on the software. Very often, I should say, databases are not regulated by national legislation, and then it means that legislation does not cannot help anyhow in solving some software issues or copyright on software issues. We haven't found any objects which require for regulation, or just objects which can be evaluated as non-processed data. But while we were getting ready for our working group activity, we identified that sometimes it's very unclear how to treat this non-processed data and how to regulate them. Then what we have found in many legislations of different countries, Japanese legislation represents the list of software, and it is quite a detailed software which identifies quite many terms, special terms, and special elements, like and it identifies even some things which are not present in some other in some other legislations, like the user manual and so on. Yeah, and it must be considered in many other practices. And then so we also try to satisfy the business demand about the the patenting process for software. How does it work in many countries, and just what are the attitudes in many countries? And we found out that there are different approaches, from complete approval to complete ban, like in Germany, when it comes to patenting the software. But all the countries show some achievements, and I wouldn't say that there is any kind of potential impact on the economic or just on the economic component. And we actually have come to the to understanding that just if there is some approach, if Russia, we cannot identify it as some special. The legislation defines several elements. Like operation systems and mobile applications. And business also shows the demand for studying the mobile applications as the object. So that's about the elements of the program, and it's there is no secret that those who made the agreements on the programs with open code or with restricted code know that rights holders let to solve the situation only with some particular elements, and the program sometimes bans to use the the original text of software, original code of the software. Sometimes they don't let let using the code, but sometimes they don't let decompile it. And it means that we have to use we have to work out the regime, which can correspond not only to the Russian product, but to the international product as well. So the new version of the program will make it easier to to provide some turnover, software turnover, especially when it comes to some automatic updating of the programs of software. Everybody has got a smartphone, and very often we get the notification that a number of programs have been updated, and this I would suppose that only those programs which you have accepted have been updated, or just which you accepted have been updated, but we don't know for sure. It means, and according to the Russian legislation, we have to make an agreement. We have to conclude an agreement on every accepted program. In some cases, it's really important. And colleagues from business say that basically it brings to challenges when it comes to some checks or checkups, because there are different types of checkups. Sometimes the tax inspector comes to you and asks to show the agreement on some particular program or some particular software. And it happens that you have got the agreement on the version, on the very outdated version, and so you don't have an agreement on the current version. And when you are asked, then it's a problem, because then the rights holder says that, or just the owner says that, I don't have an agreement, and that could be a real problem. Or once we had the, we had a request from the customer, and the customer requested the rights holder to show the agreement, and unfortunately, again, the rights holder could not produce anything. Then there are some other checkups, like the police checkups and so on. Yeah, and in this particular situation, we can make it easier with legal practice. Which is not very informative. Then another important issue that we discuss, and Viktor Naumov voiced the idea. So this important issue is about understanding or seeing a share of software, which is a derivative programs, which can be, or just a part of software which can be seen as the derivative program. Yeah, so just in some particular conditions which are specified by the agreement, the user becomes the rights holder of some particular program, and he doesn't have to question any further actions with this object. So this idea was introduced as a kind of a barrier which must be dealt with in digital economy. And originally we thought that it was really very difficult to overcome such a barrier because, actually software is a very creative thing, or just the product of creativity. But the idea was to settle just to settle the cases when the rights holder actually refuses to exercise his rights any longer with a modified object, if the object is modified. Just that, of course, asks us to consider some particular changed conditions. And, because, just in some cases, we see some just difficulties, or just we see some problems with the just with the customers who could buy such a modified object. And in these cases, there are several solutions how to treat this object later. So whether to define it as non-functional, or whether to change some something in the agreement on the copyright. So, and then as for the options for the right holder when the product is purchased, so we have to identify just the purpose, and we have to identify the regime of just of protecting the rights of the right holder, and to identify the cases when the consumer, the user, is accused of violating the rights on some wrong evidence. So then I think that probably there are some other things that we can discuss, but if the issues come up during our discussion, we can get back to them. But I think for our current discussion, we have identified several important issues. Means that while just we can widen the list of elements when the software goes through the process of of the federal registration or legal registration. So just if there are some elements which do not undergo the testing, so just we can see that there are several options in that, several solutions which are reflected in different legislations. But or there are some other practices which treat the music and literature objects, which as we saw, just the software was also treated as a part of music or musical or literature objects. But when it came to the protection of rights, so we can address Ruzana Anurbekova, and probably you can give us some more issues on that, or you can give us some ideas on that.
Good afternoon. My name is Ruzana Habekova. I'm a lawyer at the Russian legal practice Dentons in the field of intellectual property and IT. So I was just thinking what to tell you about. And then I decided to share my personal experience and the experience of my company, what we do with working every day with our customers and clients. And very often our clients complain of not having enough rights, or we do not use our rights to the full, or sometimes we cannot protect, there's no legislation protecting certain types of software.
Спасибо большое. Почему возникают эти...
So why do all these situations occur? So first of all, what we start with, this is the starting point of our today's discussion, what Sergei spoke about in his opening speech. First of all, companies do not realize the legal status of software, that any software program is protected just like a piece of literature, and then all the elements of software programs, algorithms and codes are not protected. protected by law. And there's a very telling example. And of course, I understand that I'm very pressed for time, and I cannot tell you the story in every detail, but a company from New Zealand took a Russian company to court saying that the Russian company not only violates intellectual property rights, but produces an absolutely identical software program and sells it on the Russian market. And the court says that there's no breach of violation because the codes used by the Russian company, they are absolutely different, and that means that the whole software is a different product. And this case, this story leads to the next issue that I want to discuss with you. A founder of the Russian company was used to work in New Zealand, and New Zealand says, okay, so your co-founder, the co-founder of the Russian company, used to work for us. Then he took all our codes and algorithms to Russia and set up his own business in Russia, and now he starts competing with me in Russia, with us in Russia. And the court says, how can you prove it? How can you prove it? Because he is fully employed in Russia now. Second issue to be discussed. Then inventions or designs that employees of a company do. And this is the most complicated issue, in fact. So first, we understand that in order to give the right to the IP rights to the employer, then in the contract with the employee, there should be a line saying that one of the functional duties, functional responsibility, is to design software program. And very often, these contracts and this clause in labor contracts, they are absent. And what happens in reality? An employee writes a computer code, and then when he leaves the company, he takes the code with him. And the company cannot prove that this was a kind of violation of intellectual property rights. And the company cannot blame its former employee of the violation of the intellectual property rights. And the court very often says that, well, this employee was not on your staff as a programmer. He was employed and he had another position in the company, so he did not have to write programs, and he did, so he is not to blame. And very often people who work part-time in one company or another, and they create an algorithm or a program code, and then when the matter is taken to court, then the company cannot prove any violation of property rights. And you know that companies in Russia, they very often employ people from elsewhere. They outsource certain operations, and when somebody who works as an outsource specialist, then when he leaves the company cannot prove anything. So excuse my interrupting you, because very few people actually know all provisions of the code. The results of any IP object belong to the person who created it. It doesn't matter whether the employee works for the company or works outside the company, or he's outsourced or works part-time. It doesn't matter. If he or she develops an IP product, then the intellectual property rights belong to him. But software is a different type of IT product, and when the company concludes a labor agreement with the program, there should be a separate line, a provision that all the rights, IP rights, belong to the company. But this is a very typical situation on the Russian market. So are we approaching the end or not? Please remember about the time. And this is a typical situation, and very often companies cannot prove their intellectual property rights. They cannot And I remember one of our clients, this was a very difficult case that we worked on 2 years ago. He was a programmer and he concluded a labor agreement. But the programmer said, this was just my hobby. And I wrote the software program as my hobby. And I did not write it in my office. And this was a very difficult case. Then another very difficult case, which is reuse of proprietary programs. And this is the use of by the employee of some programs that they created when being employed in the previous company, at the previous place of employment. I will skip some of the examples from my own court practice, and this often happens when companies employ a programmer, and this programmer used to work in another company, and he wrote this program when working in another company. So lack of control leads to inability to protect intellectual property right. Then modification of a software program. How to define whether the program is modified, and when the software program has been modified, did the programmer have the right to do it? So the civil code is very laconic when it comes to modification. Any modification, any changes introduced to the software program, whether to make this program compatible with other equipment or not, is considered to be a modification. But there are many court cases that tell us exactly the opposite. And there are many holes and loops in the existing legislation that does not let us to make one unified conclusion about modification. So I'm going to skip it. I understand that I don't have enough time, and probably the last point that I want to touch upon, the so-called open licenses and the use of software with the so-called open code. And very often companies do not realize the fact that this is a licensed program, and licenses grant certain rights to use such software programs. And if there is no license, then it's a breach of the existing IP legislation. And you know that there are different conditions of using a software program. For instance, making the code public, or some other conditions which companies consider to be unacceptable or not very attractive for themselves. So to cut a long story short, how to avoid all these unpleasant situations and what can be done to have a better control over software design. So all business processes have to be based on legal provisions. All business processes in companies have to rely on the existing labor legislation. Labor contracts are necessary, including the relevant provisions. Companies have to have a repository of program codes, and transparency is needed. And there's another solution that we offer to one of our clients when we produced different kinds of lists: white list, black list, and gray list of codes. And if an open license belongs to the white list, then it's legal to use this code and this license. When the code and the license is in black, on the blacklist, then it cannot be used. And gray list, these are suspicious licenses with suspicious conditions of its use, and they need to be checked. And this transparency helps us to avoid lots of problems. Yuri has an objection, as I can see it. Are you trying to say that our legislation can solve all problems or not? Well, I remember a story about 2 lawyers and 3 opinions. I don't mean people in this audience, but in general, 2 lawyers, 3 opinions. And once I took part in a meeting of the Court of the Council on Intellectual Rights, and we discussed intellectual IP rights for software, whether part-time workers who design software programs, so who owns the rights. And the lawyers had three opinions. First opinion, so the one whom the programmer gives the program, who is the first to own it, has the rights for it. Second opinion, if the programmer was asked to design and who asked him to design this program, then the employer has the right. Ownership rights. And then there was a third opinion that it's joint property rights. So there are, there are many options. Well, life is so complicated, and it's much more complicated, and there are many more cases than those described and envisaged by the provisions of the law. But there's one conclusion that we can draw from Ruzana's presentation. We have to start protecting our IP rights when the product is being developed, at the moment of it developed. Today at the Forbes breakfast, somebody said that prevention is better than cure. So that's why we have to work internally and externally. I agree with you. Two lawyers, three opinions, and we have more lawyers. I'm sure that we will listen to another very interesting opinion, which is offered by us to us by Ruslan Yunusov. And we will speak about algorithms, visualizations, and the original code. So the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, colleagues. It's really great that the legislation on intellectual property in different countries is kind of harmonized, or just goes in line with the other legislations, and so we can see some similar laws, and we can understand how the courts treat similar issues. But today we are going to speak about the protection of the copyright for the derivative programs. So do we have any similar examples? Do we have any other countries or legislation in other countries which settle different disputes? And that is the United States. And so the legislation is, some legislation is in general is similar, but there are some more detailed requirements and more detailed restrictions. So when one program or when one software almost fully copies a similar program, then probably we don't have anything to prove. And then the legislator is inspired by that and, just doesn't have anything to change. American legislation comes from the proposition that in this case, the very fact of copying or modification can be proved by the assumption that the modifier had got the access to the original product. And then probably, it could be seen in the fact that there is some similarity between the original product and the derived program. Then there is the next step, which is about abstraction and comparison. So at the step of abstraction, the laws differentiate between the ideas and the implementation of the idea. So they check the set of functions, they check the set of modules and the correspondence between modules, and they try to get the most general principle, basic ideas of software. So and they don't protect that. They put that aside. The second part is filtration. The second step is filtration. And then they identify the elements which are still there, but they are not significant in terms of legislation, legislation-wise. And probably it's, just about outsourcing, or it doesn't belong to all the programs, or if the code or the code, well, just like application code interface, can be, well, instigated by some particular functions. So, and if you use some other, well, just functions or some other ways of writing the code, that would be inefficient. And any software designer would use these particular code or this particular way to write the code to get the particular functions. So then we also put aside these results which are not relevant or are not urgent for the comparison. And what do we have? So just, and then we analyze the duplication. Just if there are lots of things which duplicate each other, then when the courts compare two programs, then they make the conclusion that yes, so the one program duplicates the other program or copies the other program. It's the United States is not the only country which goes this principle. Or then Canada and the United Kingdom will just try to do the same. The United Kingdom provides quite low protection for, well, this modified software, but at least they can use the same principle. So the Russian legislation and the Russian judicial practice does not see, well, the same number of cases which are really well defined and well written. The well, judicial practice about the computer software is quite extensive, but unfortunately we don't witness the cases of this character. So in majority we talk about the program A and program B, or software A and software B, and then we address the ROS patent, and then we try to compare the original codes if they well, just if they coincide or not. Yeah, so but all these actions do not work well in protecting the rights. So, but anyway, the courts go almost the similar routes when they do that. Once I published a paper where I analyzed that the action of Russian laws, of Russian courts, and I understood that, well, Russian courts try to study some additional codes, additional modules, additional well, functions, and well, then they don't have very much to rely on, or sometimes they say, well, this software has the two software have got the same mistakes and the same drawbacks, and it means that they are very similar. And then, well, just, and that could be the justification, or just it could be the well, just enough evidence to show that two softwares are similar. So just it means that sometimes, well, just or just it gives us some hope to understand that courts will probably take that into consideration. It will be more efficient. Thank you so much. Well, I can say that the Russian computer or software industry with more than $1 trillion turnover can witness only 2 or 3 cases with this, well, derivative program right protection. And that, of course, is very impressive. And then I would say that the picture is, or just the picture that we have got here is a little bit gloomy. The American legislation is different, and it shows us that the courts can go further than the legislation framework and try to truly analyze each and every case, trying to understand what's wrong and how it goes wrong. And we stay within the frameworks of the requirements. So doesn't that mean that it's not so sensible? Yeah, but well, unfortunately, we cannot re-regulate the well, just the norms, or we cannot set too many regulations. So you will produce now the set of regulations, but the courts won't go after these regulations. They won't follow this set of regulations. So yeah, it is always surprising, but well, just I have been working with it more than 15 years, and I always meet people who say, well, I've modified it 22%. And so it means that it's a completely different product. So just why should I be accused of, well, just stealing the copyright? So, but actually very much depends on the experts who provide with the final assessment of the project or of the object. So then it comes to the court. So just it's about the experts. So just think about how ignorant or literate the experts are. So, but we came to the real essence of the problem, and we can study the experience of Sberbank. I think it is really very inspiring, and we have got two representatives of Sberbank. And well, just it is bank, but it's more than bank. It's even wider than bank. So just I know that Sberbank has decided to protect what's going on in software industry, but they decided to go through patent activity to provide the protection. So they developed some software. They don't give any details about this software. So, and just they decided to combine software and patent, and I think that, well, the representative of Sberbank can tell us about it in more detail.
Thank you very much, Sergey. We have answers to all of your questions, and we can offer our detailed responses. So we spoke very sadly about copyrights, the copyright problem, and now we are going to speak about the even sadder problem of patents. So when we speak about the protection of IT solutions, in patenting is a strategically important problem. And if you look at this slide, you will see the 10 biggest patent holders. During the last 9 to 10 years, we will see that the biggest patent holders on this list, there's only one Russian company, and it is ranked 9 out of 10. Biggest patent owners. And we analyzed the situation with patenting in Russia, and we understood that patent applications from bigger corporations, then we see that a Chinese company or biggest European companies, one Chinese company sends 1,500 patent applications a year. The biggest IT giants in Russia, only 300 patent applications in 10 years. So there's a patent bubble on the markets. And at one point, this bubble will burst. And when it happens, then all our biggest corporations and our startup companies will find themselves in a very difficult position. When we look at the patent landscape of our industry, you will see the telecom, blockchain, AI, all overloaded with patent applications coming from biggest vendor corporations. In China, there is a state-supported program offering support to research institutions, smaller companies, big industrial giants. And that's why 1.5 patent applications from all sectors of the economy are sent to patenting authorities. And Sberbank, we are not only a bank. And 1.5 years ago, 18 months ago, we set up 10 innovative laboratories, employing the brightest people from startups, from other companies, who 24 hours innovate. This is their major function. Innovate in cyber protection, blockchain, the Internet of Things, and many other spheres. And all these solutions, the moment they appear, they are implemented within the bank, in our daughter companies. For instance, FinTech see what you're doing. You are advertising yourself. You are sort of imposing your solutions onto us. No, no, no. We are working for the benefits of our clients, and we're speeding up our biometric procedures. We increase the level of security, cyber security, and 15,000 programmers. They are the brightest people, and they are doing everything to make us more efficient, and they want to patent their inventions. And as I said, there is a patent bubble in Russia, and it will inevitably burst. So how to protect our invention? In the protection of our inventions, we protect legally. We get patents on algorithms, systems, and design solutions. And then I go back to your question, Sergey. So if you patent everything and make all your secrets public, we strike a reasonable balance between what we keep to ourselves and what we make public. We have a very good team of programmers, at the same time having a legal education, and they understand what can be made public and what can be not, what codes can be made public, what data can be made public, and what cannot, what the general public cannot and should not have access to preserve our corporate secrets. And of course, the reason for not having this patent legislation, our programmers do not have this IP code. When we take our other countries, US, Europe, or China, then there's no such a problem, because programmers there understand that as soon as they invented something, wrote a software, so they have to patent it, because whoever can ask them about the patent, it's in their DNA code. Whoever grandmother can ask them, a friend, well, probably we don't have that active grandmothers who would ask about a code or a patent. But what I'm driving at is that there are instruments that we can use. And I think that any company is mature enough only when each employee creates an added value and patents it. The inventors have to patent their inventions, and I'm sure. Excuse my interrupting. So in your bank, you don't have any system of knowledge management, so you send everything to a patent agency. Yes, but we have to be ahead of everybody when we run to such a patent agency. Yes, we do have a system of knowledge management. So let's go back to the culture of all those people who write these programs. They are. We have to speak same language, and my colleague Alexander will tell you how it can be done in practice.
Our practice shows that the software designer cannot write a patent application because he doesn't have the necessary knowledge. He doesn't know how to. He doesn't have the same expertise. He doesn't know how it is done abroad, and just he cannot do the application. He cannot write the application. So he has to go to the patent department to outsource this work, or he has to be explained how to do it. And that's the the task that we try to solve, and we try to teach people how to do it. And we design different forms of motivation and stimulation. Just for these people, that's a kind of just speaking a different language. Yeah. So just our people just design some different things, and they work for money, they work for the interest, but that's a different story. Yeah, and the idea is that we try to introduce the IP code, or this DNA code, as it goes in English version, and we try to encourage all our developers to do it, because right now in Russia it's the urgent problem. So thank you very much. And it's a very interesting story with Sberbank, because Sberbank meets the challenges, and so just it develops the some special ways of this design work, this protection work, and so they have some professionals whom you can address and whom you can talk to if you have some problems or just if you don't understand something, because there are also people who are, not specialists, and there are people who need to have their work, so to say, translated from one language into another. But of course, we have to understand the instruments, how to make everything work. And I can say that the Russian government has done almost everything. In the federal law 35 was modified in 2014, and it stipulated that the modified objects can be paid for. But it has to be patented. If it is not, so then you can be paid up to 10% extra to your wage. So if you use the modified object, or if you have modified the object, we have a very differentiating approach, and we have to evaluate every modified object, and we have got this kind of fork, which states different, or which gives different figures. So just you use some metrics, right? Just you use some metrics how to calculate the payment, and how to justify each particular case. But the story which we started with Yuri, so do you find it kind of comfortable? Do you see these additional options? Or do you think that this terminology modification or diversifications, do you expect legislation to accept all that? We find this story that has been told very exciting, and the only thing I would like to ask is to focus more on some modified modified work. I think that sometimes when you pay some remuneration or some extra money, for people who just write codes and then or just modify somebody else's work is not it's not reasonable. I think it's a little bit unfair. I think that we have to admit that the system is rather complicated, and but when it comes to the digital economy, nobody has come to this to this barrier, but it is really flexible. And if Sberbank is a powerful organization which can introduce some new methods of work. The governmental requirements, they are not the strict barrier. They are not the solid barrier. If you have some, objections, just come and prove that you have got some other point of view, and we will introduce some amendments to that. But you remember we spoke about the code of Yandex, or we spoke about with the representative of Yandex, and he mentioned that everything, or that, just many things work the same way in Yandex. And I asked him if they I asked him a question that if it is really why they do that, if they consider that it is really difficult to protect a patent on such solutions in the Russian Federation. Just why do you do that? He said that it's about capitalization, that they see some profit in the future, and that in at least 20-year time, they will see some, they will get some benefit from that. Now it is available only to some big companies, major companies, because it's quite expensive thing to do. but they do it because they see some future in it. They see some benefit which they can derive in the future. So we started from the mechanisms of software protection, and we discussed some particular challenges, but we come to a particular thing which is about our everyday work and about the solutions that we take during our everyday work. But I would like to give the floor to Ludmila Karasova, who, Ludmila Karasova.
So the company that I represent, the company Center, and we are the only operator of the only we work in lottery, in the system of lotteries, and even though we are not an IT company, for us, the protection of our intellectual property rights and our programs that we use to organize lotteries. And I myself, I am head of the Department of Risk Management, and we have lawyers and we have IT specialists, and they work together in order to minimize the risks of our companies, because we are in the lottery business, and we try to make internal communication within the company more efficient. And as risk managers, according to all the existing international standards, there are four risks: compliance, risk management, strategic management, and reporting risks. And of course, when it comes to intellectual property, we have to minimize all four types of risks and perfect our internal procedures, particularly when it comes down to protecting IP rights for our software. And risk management is department reports to the senior management of the companies, and when our lawyers cannot find solutions to our problems, then we employ other lawyers. And IP risks are considered to be the most important groups of risks for us. So we looked at our company, at all the processes that we have: marketing, software, design, and legislation, legal protection. And marketing is quite simple, but when it comes down to designs, software design, we have patents, registered patents, and we have a system of internal control, and these are the so-called primary internal measures that our company has to protect our IP rights. When it comes down to designing software, I agree with my colleagues, because when we start designing a software program, then the legal protection starts with the very first moment. I will skip some of the slides. So here is a comparison. So when we initiate a software product, when we start doing feasibility studies, then we start assessing the possibility of creating intellectual property, and then whether the software has to be protected, and if it has to be protected, then we have to patent it. And there have been cases when we patented our software as inventions, and this is more costly and more complicated from the legal point of view. But we patent our software as a computer programs, and everything is documented. There's a special document regulating who is involved, who does what, and which programmer is responsible for what kind of work. And if a new employee is hired to work on the same project, then an additional agreement is signed with him, and there's a special provision on the ownership of intellectual property rights. And of course, we have in-service training on intellectual property rights, and this in-service training includes every department, not only senior management, but also our accountants who should be aware of the system of remuneration for inventions. So this is a wheel diagram describing all our business processes, and if there's something, if there is a mistake, if for instance, remuneration is not paid to the person who designed it, then we're not protected well enough. So this wheel that you show us, and I think that even the wheel itself, this diagram, is an intellectual property product. And if you don't object to it, we can share it with our colleagues, because other companies can use it in their everyday work. I will go back in my presentation. So in this slide, you can see the maturity scheme of a company when it comes to risk management. So all companies start with a compliance level when they start not to violate the rights of third parties, and they work and focus their efforts on marketing mostly, then operational processes and avoiding operational risks. And mature companies, they work with strategical risks when they assess the possibility of creating intellectual property and start planning their protection. So now my company is in the middle part of this life cycle, and our system of risk management has been in place only for 1 year, but IP specialists have been a department for several years, but still we have not moved very far along this axis, and we are still working on better control of all internal processes. Thank you very much. So I see a few points, and we have 2 more speakers on our agenda on the program. There are 2 important points. So when we start working on software design, so we have to be very cautious when we sign agreements with programmers and outsourced and part-time employees. First thing. Second thing, we have to be cautious when we work with the so-called open codes. And third thing, and I borrowed it from third idea, I borrowed it from Yuri, Yandex, Sberbank, and other giant companies where software programs are key to the performance of the companies. All these giants have an IP management system, treating their software as inventions, as patents, and they work with patent agencies and SMEs, small and medium-sized companies. Probably this complicated and comprehensive system, they cannot afford it, and that's why they want to use the existing legislation for the protection of their own rights. And I think that all the coming changes, that they have to work for the benefit of SMEs. So do I see you? Did I understand you correctly? Unfortunately,
business is not always ready to do that, because sometimes the lawyers come to us and say, well, just, what is the risk? How can we assess the risk? How we can evaluate the risk? But then we try to work out a risk calculator. It's the mathematical model, and we, just have... And for example, we come up with the result that it's 2 million rubles, or the risk is 100,000 rubles. So just what can we do with it? Yeah, just well, if you kind of frighten your employer with big figures, then they will invest in IP technologies, right? No, it's not only about that, but sometimes the very essence of the technology is unclear. That's why you don't understand whether you need to do that or not. Then I would like to invite Naumova Yelena, the protection technology. Head of the marketing and PR at Projected Technology. Yelena will speak a little bit wider on the same topic, and so she will be speaking about the information protection. Not exactly. I'm the representative of the company of software developers, and many of gamers speak rather badly about us. So just many of you are gamers, right? So you played Star Wars, you played some Stalker and some other games. So just you play Star Force. I would like to talk about the protection of intellectual property rights that the legal aspect does not take into consideration the time. So everything, so just the time when it can bring you money is from 1 to 3 years, then it won't work. And the solution of the problem must be taken within 1 or 2 years. That's why the smaller development and smaller developers and major developers try to protect the market, try to keep the market alive. And the first stage is anyway when the developers and software designers try to protect with their own means, try to protect themselves with their own means, with the means which are offered by the market. And only then they address the legislation and lawyers. And at the very first stage, when the software comes on sale, until it is hacked or until it's outdated, you are not legally protected. Only if you frighten people that, well, just beware of stealing from us. The second element is the cultural one, just the culture of consumers, the consumer culture. And everybody who laughed here, I guess that you tried to, just to hack software or to steal the software. Yeah, so that's the truth of our life in Russia. And so just if you get the software for free in online, so it's kind of cool. Yeah, just you don't use the paid software, but it's cooler to use the hacked software. So that's why, of course, the software developers try to do everything to protect their software from stealing. So, and if it is not possible to steal from the final user, that's one thing, but and that's the first stage. And then the second point is to protect what you do from the competitors, from your rivals. And in Russia, unfortunately, it's it's a big issue, big problem, because our company used to produce the protection for software, for games, and for the films, and we saw the challenge that when you develop some new software solution, it is not in demand in Russia. Like, for example, the original code. Just if you want your original code not to be stolen, you must to be it very tangled. Just you must to be it so much coded that it couldn't be re-engineered. So, and we calculated the statistics that out of all the Russian companies, out of all the Russian companies, just when we did that, it was bought by only one company. When it came to China or Korea, it was bought by hundreds, so which is well a good indicator of the culture, of customer culture. So just when you produce something to protect the software product, it bumps into this lack of culture, consumer culture in Russia. The best culture is shown by the countries, by Oriental countries, and by Oriental markets. And we analyze the statistics that in Russia we do not have. The developers, software developers, do not stand any competition. Almost no competition. So the company InfoProtector provides or produces the only, it's the only company which produces the protection for software. The other companies which produce applications or whatever, so they don't do anything. So just for this huge market, we are the only ones. So and we even sometimes outsource the clients, because sometimes we don't do everything that they want, or I try to identify the problems because we don't see any solutions to them, especially some legal solutions. And we also saw understood that every software must be hacker resistant, and it must be resistant to anonymous hacking. There is a problem that we don't have enough people. We don't have enough developers who can do that. For example, I can give you a very simple example. The Star Force protection was being hacked for 442 days. And almost all software was being hacked for quite many days, but actually the number of days was decreasing with the time. Programmers know each other very well, and we cannot sometimes share the customers because, then it means that we share the secrets and we share the protection, and then our software stands unprotected. So these are the challenges that I would identify. So we don't have the market, we don't have the competition, we don't have enough customers, and we don't have enough instruments to protect. So, but you've mentioned a very important thing. You've mentioned that there is almost no competition in this market in Russia. Yes, there is very high competition abroad, but almost no competition in Russia. But economists say that any innovative product, in the market, if you want to sell an innovative product in the market must be populated with enough people. If the market is empty, so no product can pay itself off. But when we come to the Russian market and when we think about the digital solutions, when we think about any digital solution, even ATM, even then, we have 140 million people, but quite few and quite many technical solutions. We have got fewer people than solutions. And if we compare our market to European market or to American or to Oriental market, we can see that, it is much more populated, so to say. So then it means that technologically, well, that technologically this market is not ready to absorb all these technical solutions. And if we think about some other solutions in some other well, fields like biotechnologies or just medicine, so sometimes the solutions are not patented because, well, just there is no need for that. Yeah, because it won't be stolen, because there is no need for that. So we've spoken how to do it from different points of view, like what must be done, well, in terms of legislation, in terms of technology. But we have got another speaker. Well, we have got Ruslan Yusufov, who is going to talk about the IP chain and what can be done from IP chain point of view.
So thank you very much for giving me the floor. So this was a literacy course on law for me. And I listened to my colleagues who were hacked, and I'm sure that there are people, even among participants, who will find all the ill-willed people, all the hackers, and take them to court. And of course, I understand the importance of this issue, and I think there should be a case that when hackers are taken to court. So please raise your hands, those of you who participated in a workshop 1 hour ago. Because I'm going to repeat one of the key points in my presentation. So I will start with this figure. So in 5 minutes, I will explain what blockchain is, and I will give you an idea of what happens in IP. So World Economic Forum, 10% of the world GDP in 10 years will be capped in 2027 in blockchain. And all those of you who knows this Gardner cycle, so this curve shows you the maturity level of technologies. So innovation trigger, this is where it starts, then it grows, reaching its peak of inflated expectations, and this peak, at this peak, we start hearing from radio, TV screens about this technology, and that's what happened to blockchain when we started hearing this word, blockchain. Then the curve goes down. This is the valley of disillusionment, and then it goes up to the plateau of productivity. So the life cycle of a technology, starting with an innovation trigger to its productivity cycle, it takes some time, and I would recommend everybody to think of your technologies from this point of view. So this hype peak, hype cycle for emerging technologies, blockchain. So a lot was expected of it, but all of a sudden, some expectations never came true. It doesn't matter that it doesn't mean that the technology is bad. It's just that it doesn't meet the expectations of society. And at the very end and bottom left, you see a smart dust sign, and it takes that usually that. It takes 5 to 10 years for blockchain to meet the expectations of society. And when we start thinking about any technologies, including blockchain, and blockchain is a sort of a rubber concept, and we can stretch it and give it different interpretations. And if we start thinking in blockchain terms about any industry, then and analyze blockchain in finance and blockchain in oil extraction, blockchain in medicine, they're all different blockchains. And the blockchain itself is a combination of different technologies. And these technologies also have their own life cycles. For instance, when a technology went through this mining and crypto purses, then it also characterized a certain development stage of blockchain. We have to look at the blockchain technology from the 3D perspective. So let's start from the very beginning. Blockchain means money. And last year, the venture investment into blockchain was 5 billion. It was triple the amount in the world than 1 year ago, excluding crypto fundraising. These are venture money. How much, according to the ADC assessment by 2020, so there will be almost 12 billion expenditures for blockchain investments in the world by 2022. And the annual budget of blockchain has almost reached $2 billion. So why blockchain? So what is the motivation behind blockchain? So it's an attractive idea and businesses are ready to invest into it. But I want you to pay your attention to one point. People and companies are afraid to miss a good opportunity, to be late for grabbing this opportunity and making money. And here you can see the results of a Deloitte assessment of the situation. So how every second bigger company in 2019 are ready to start a blockchain project. And when we ask investors what is the main problem with blockchain, and the explanation is only one. Senior management of companies don't understand what blockchain is. They have very high expectations, which are very much which are unrealistic. Excuse my interrupting you, but last year we had a survey of blockchain technologies and its use in IP. And only 3% of companies understood what blockchain is, what is the essence of this technology, and 67% of the respondents believe that blockchain technologies will still improve the situation on the IP market. And I thought that probably this is very typical of our country, to believe in the good thing. We don't understand what blockchain is, but we think that this is a very beneficial phenomenon for the country. So thank you for this very vivid example. And we are a link between senior management of companies, and we try and explain to companies not what blockchain is, but how to use it. When we go back to IPs, so there are very many scenarios. And today, in our 5 minutes presentation, what people speak about, they speak about the necessity to cut costs, to increase efficiency of work, to compete better on the IP market. And there are many other tasks. And when companies ask us what blockchain can be used for. So they want to store data or use it in management and exercise control and increase transparency of processes. And the last thing that companies want to speed up transactions, to get rid of all the intermediary companies and intermediary actors, and blockchain can be used for some micro transactions and many other functions that blockchain can perform. Do you think we can just have this slide on the screen for some time? So today we have there's a very good storage process when we send the program to Rospatent, and Rospatent is kept there in their system, and then because Rospatent is a trusted authority, and as soon as somebody needs this code, they can apply to Rospatent. But Rospatent is a part of IP chain, and when a software program is sent to Rospatent, and Rospatent keeps the codes, and this system really works. So Rospatent works in IP chain, and I myself and Grigory, head of Rospatent, have been discussing one question. So can we place in Skolkovo not the whole software programs, but say only one part, a hash tag of the hashed programs, hash code of the program. So, and this will speed up the time of protecting ourselves. So blockchain works best when we can have one single environment for different stakeholders, which means that we can find a joint solution of an IP chain is a revolutionary solution. And IP chain introduces blockchain on a wider scope. And the IP court is ready to use the data which we can provide as testimony, as evidence in different court cases. And the single depository of codes will be an integral part of our IP chain. And this is a new development. And all these developments, all these movements require patenting. And we start working with the universities and institutes and see whether there's any experience in the world when results of intellectual activity of higher educational institutions are patented. And I know that there is a very interesting report on patenting on distributed register of codes, and this is a very good and recent publication. Yeah, I know. I read this report.
Yeah, I read this, and I think that it's. I can highly recommend it. They analyzed it from a very interesting point of view, and Microsoft also introduces blockchain in their practice, and it's the kind of the cloud technology, cloud story. It certainly stimulates. Well, just with the counterfeit software is also very important, and I would say that it's not only about the major brand to look for some elements of luxury, but it's well, just a blockchain technology, well, like IP Morgan Bank or Huawei or Sony. So they all deal with blockchain, and they all see motivation in that. Thank you so much. I think that, yeah, from the grassroots, I would say. When we spoke about Ross patent, well, just unfortunately, when you file the code for the registration, there is no expert evaluation. No, and will never be. But as the developers, we understand that sometimes the codes are not the true ones, just sometimes they do not stand all the requirements. Yeah, so, but, well, we speak about some objects, well, where which initiate the rights without any registration. Yeah, so, but the Brazilians spoke about a different option. Well, but if you initiate well, just the same text with the same search text, well, colleagues, I think that unfortunately we have to well, close our session now, because the room must be well, just must be used for some other discussion and for some other session. So, but let's again get back to the major issue. So we have looked at it from different angles, from different points of view, but there are some major points, like you have to proceed from some from some good intentions, and you have to think about the well, intra-company culture. Then we also understand that the legislator very soon will come to understanding what the software is and what software code is and how it works, and it must be well, that it can be actually it can be the object for the patent, and it can be the object for the well, just considerations whether it can be stolen, it's the object which can be stolen or cannot. Then then when it comes to expert assessment, we understand that, well, sometimes expert assessment does not work for smaller and medium companies, but the whole patent mechanism can work for the major companies. Though while small and medium companies can be happy with blockchain technology so that they can at least protect their intellectual property. So, well, and the final point is that well, actually, when you develop a game, you have lots of tools how to protect the property. Just you can install your own technological mechanisms to prevent stealing, to prevent theft, or to prevent decoding, or to prevent diversifying engineering. So just we know all these things, and we know that if legislation does not protect, well, then the developers can protect themselves with some simple tools which are available to them. So thanks a lot. Yeah, thank you.